The EU says it's preparing new economic sanctions against Russia in response to its announced military mobilization and the preparation of so-called referendums in Ukrainian territory. Now, Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell for the EU said the measures would focus on individuals as well as certain sectors of the economy. They would be the 8th package of sanctions against Russia. Borrell was speaking in New York after a meeting of EU foreign ministers on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. And for more on this, we welcome Oleg Ustenko to the show. He's an economic advisor to Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine. Mr. Ustenko, thank you for joining us
here.
Terrific. I want to begin with these sanctions, or this discussion of new sanctions. With this escalation that we're seeing from Putin in terms of his language, in terms of the mobilization, can we expect, do you expect that to sharpen EU resolve for sanctions? Or do you expect to see a let-up as we near winter and colder temperatures?
Look, now I think that it's very clear for everybody. The war now, which Russia and his regime, or the Putin's regime is conducting against us, is not just our war. It's war against all of us, it's war against Europe, and it's also war against the civilized world. From this point of view, of course, we have to understand that our militaries are doing the best they can do on a battlefield. But there is another battlefield, and this another battlefield is everything related to sanctions. And from this point of view, what we would expect after those steps which were undertaken by Moscow quite recently, we are expecting more sanctions. And more precisely to tell about sanctions, I would say that we are expecting sanctions which will really hit Russia in terms of their financial revenues.
What are sanctions?
We have to stop sending bloody money to Vladimir Putin and his regime, which means for me that we have to stop everything related to trading with Russia in terms of energy. So energy sanctions, this is what is desirable and what we would love to see in package number 8. This is really needed. And please keep in mind that Russians are receiving the main source of their revenue from energy sector. It's more than 40%. Just from oil, they are receiving between 35 to 37%, let's say up to 40% just from oil. That's why it's so very important.
The EU could say, look, we've agreed to end imports of coal, which it's already put in place. We've agreed to end oil imports later this year, and that natural gas is no longer as much of an issue because Russia itself is already reducing flows. What more can you expect if the EU can point to those things and say we've already taken steps?
Right. The steps are already taken. And yes, it's true that the oil embargo is going to be imposed since December 5th. It's also true that we are working on a so-called price mechanism or price cap for Russian oil. But in fact, it's going to be imposed, my understanding is also since December 5th. This is definitely not enough. Please keep in mind that every day Russians are receiving from their energy somewhere close to 1 billion euros, 1 billion euro. And the war they are conducting against all of us cost them for their budget approximately around 750 million euros, meaning that we have to cut off them from there. But let me also tell you that when you are talking about the coal industry, yes, it was already imposed embargo. But as we can see just recently, there was kind of some flexibility which EU already showed.
The EU changing its guidelines.
Exactly. This is not just acceptable. Look, our people are still fighting.
Just to clarify real quick, the EU changed its guidelines to allow EU shippers to ship Russian coal to third parties. That originally was not part of the sanctions, but that was changed recently. The EU saying that it's necessary for global security. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, and we think that it's just not acceptable. Just not acceptable. So basically the position is not that strong as it's supposed to be. In terms of gas, it's also true. Yes, you are absolutely right. Europe is less dependent now on Russian oil and Russian gas. But also true that never, again, Russia is going to be a reliable source of energy. So we have to prepare Europe. Now, Europe have to be prepared for those non-reliable energy sources now. So it means that the steps should be undertaken now, despite...
At the same time, Europe is about to enter winter. Temperatures are already colder here. Many businesses and households are switching from gas-fueled heaters to fuel oil heaters. So if there's suddenly an embargo on oil tomorrow, potentially prices go up. They're facing higher prices. How do you respond to that message when people tell you, and I'm sure you've been hearing this, we're not ready to sacrifice our comfort, or it's just not sustainable price-wise? That is a legitimate concern here. How do you address that?
I would say that, first of all, when we are talking about oil prices, it's just not the case. When we are introducing this price cap, it's very likely that it's going to be even...
It's not sure.
Look, we heard a lot of talks all over Europe and in the world in terms of if we are going to impose, anything, any embargo related to Russian oil, then the prices are going up just dramatically, rocket skying. But it did not happen. And look, what are the prices for energy now? They're on a level, let's say, of around $100 per barrel for Brent. And even now, when sanctions are not still in place for energy sector, we can observe that Russians are trading with their oil with a significant discount. So, but it's also true that now in Europe you have enough storages to go through this winter in terms of gas, in terms of oil, in terms of all other energy resources. On the top of that, please also keep in mind that if here you are talking about 1-2 Celsius below compared with what you had before in your apartments, please also think about our people who are living without heating at all, at all.
I want to switch gears for a second and ask you, in a month, there's going to be a major donors conference here in Berlin for Ukraine. How important is it to convince potential donors and creditors that Ukraine continue to have military success? How closely coupled is that with your appeal for more money, frankly?
Let me be as frank as possible here. Look, we have to understand that when the Ukrainian economy was destroying and is still destroying because it's still under attacks of Russian, of course, our budget is not experiencing the best time. Initially, we were planning that it's going to be a budget deficit for whole year, 7.5 billion euros. Now we have this monthly deficit of around 5 billion euros, the monthly deficit. Obviously, we need to continue our economic to be running. So this is for sure. Because, again, we have two different fronts. We have one front which is an actual battlefield. Another front which we have is an economic front.
You're printing more money right now. How long is that sustainable?
I'm not talking about that I'm asking for more money. I am asking that, EU have to deliver what was promised before. And we are coming to the new year, meaning that we still are going to have a budget deficit. Our economy is doing a little bit better now compared with the first months of the invasion. But still, we are expecting that it's going to be a budget deficit on a level of 40 billion euros next year. And it means that if we would like to win this war, and I'm sure that we need to win this war, moreover, we need to win this war as soon as possible, right? It should be finished as soon as possible. Then we have, several simple requests. We need more weapons and we need more ammunition. We need money to finance our budget deficit because we need to pay salaries.
And going to that, you are in discussions right now with the IMF about what you want from them. You want a especially tailored program to the tune of 15 to 20 billion euros for Ukraine from the IMF that you also believe will help stabilize finances, bring in more support. There's been some hesitancy from the IMF to support Assad in a war, essentially, to potentially throw its weight in one direction if it's not sure who's going to even win this conflict. How are those negotiations, those talks going, and how do you overcome that hesitation?
Look, let me be very clear. In our minds, we don't have even that question who is going to win this war. It's actually not a conflict, it's a war. And in our view, we are going to win. And everybody understands that we are going to win this war. And even if you can look at our latest development on the battlefield, it's also very sure that we are winning this war. And also true that we need to keep an integrity, a unity among our allies. And it's also true that we are in consultations, and even I would say that in technical consultations now with IMF.
And how's that going? What are you hearing from their side? Do you feel optimistic about it?
And we are very optimistic about that side. The negotiations are going. The Prime Minister already made several statements related to this issue. We are expecting the mission of IMF, so we are moving forward there. But it's also true that, finance and current needs are extremely important. But you are talking about the conference which is going to take place in Berlin. Extremely important, just extremely important. And I would say that we have to think in terms of two different horizons. The first one is a short-term horizon. And this short-term horizon, I would call it a fast-track program, fast-track recovery program. This is, the Ukrainian way, how we call it in Ukraine. Look, we have hundreds of thousands of people who just do not have roofs above them.
As winter approaches?
And winter is approaching, exactly. Then we have critical infrastructure destroyed. Some critical infrastructure needs to be repaired right away.
Russians have destroyed some power plants as they've been moving out of these areas, correct?
Absolutely. But then, of course, the second part of the discussion is everything related to rebuilding of Ukraine. But the war is still going. That's why, actually, the sooner we are finishing this war, the sooner we got our common victory, the better we are going to be in the future. And less money, actually, we are going to spend.
$350 billion price tag, that's the estimate for rebuilding right now in Ukraine, almost $100 billion worth of physical damage alone. I want to ask you, finally, to wrap up, are you optimistic or are you pessimistic as you go around Europe and you talk to Europeans about your needs and what you're pressing them for?
In terms of numbers, 350 billion US dollars, those which are already verified. However, the price tag might be much higher. And the war, keep in mind that the war is still ongoing. So the price tag, if you are including the direct and indirect cost, might be as high as 1 trillion US dollars or euros. If we are talking in terms of attitude of people here, I can assure you that majority of Germans, majority of Europeans are in favor to Ukraine.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. That was Oleg Ustenko, economic advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Mr. Ustenko, thank you very much for joining us. Sorry to cut you short. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.